Did Danielle have her hand up? We're good? Okay.
I see you very well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, good morning, Anita. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so before we begin with the skeleton, I do want to take, and again, I want to just apologize for the poor lighting. I think part of it is because I'm on my computer instead of my iPad, and part of it is because it's so cloudy outside. So I had to open up all the lights, otherwise it'd be in total darkness. But I think it will serve its purpose. So let's start by just centering ourselves though. So come and sit. Sit on your blankets, on your mat. Lengthen your spinal column. Take your shoulders down and back. Close your eyes. Remain with your eyes closed. And become fully aware of your breathing. Begin to slow down your breath in. And to slow down your breath out. So that you bring yourself fully into the present moment. Feeling the movement of your breath as you take that breath in. And the movement of your breath as you take your breath out. Take one hand to the center of your chest, take the other hand on top of it. Close your eyes if they're not already closed. And feel the movement of your breath beneath your hands. The fullness of the in-breath, the emptiness of the out-breath. And take 5 breaths in this way. At the end of your 5th breath, rest your hands on your lap. And then open your eyes. Okay, so what I wanted to do today was give you a little bit of some anatomy. And the reason that I want to do this, I do this in my college classes, and what I found is that having a visual of the structure of the body really enhances our awareness when we're doing the poses themselves. Many of my students, they've told me that after kind of viewing the skeleton, when they do the postures, they can visualize how their body is moving more fully in the poses. So I want to take us through. This is little Baba Ram. He's a little bit crooked. And I want to go over some basic anatomy, most especially of the spinal column. So we have 26 vertebrae. These are the vertebrae. These are the spinous processes here. And in between each vertebra, if you can see here, these are nerves. So we have nerves that radiate out from the spinal column and back into the spinal column. And there are nerves that radiate through each of those spaces between the vertebrae. So I'm going to bring him a little bit closer. And you can see here, this in between, these are the spinal discs. So if you also look, right, you'll see that the vertebrae, they start out narrow, and then they get much thicker as we come down. You see over here, by the way, this little red thing? This is an illustration of, you've heard of like herniated discs, bulging discs. So what happens in a herniated disc, in a bulging disc, is that the gelatinous material that makes up the disc winds up pressing out. It winds up moving out of that space. And what that does, it causes pain, because now the bones, they're pressing into that disc, and then those discs are pressing into those nerves. So that's why when people have herniations, they feel pain, because it winds up pressing on the nerves that radiate to and from the spinal cord. We have 26 vertebrae. So here, these are the 7 vertebrae of the neck. And that area of the body is called the cervical spine. So if you look, I'll bring them down a little bit. This topmost vertebra right here is called the atlas. And this bone, which is the bottom bone of the skull, it's called the occipital bone. So the atlas bone comes up into this little opening here behind the occipital bone. The atlas bone, think of like Atlas holding the world up. It's sometimes called the yes bone, because it's what enables us to move our head up and down. Just below that, this is what's called the axis bone. You see how it protrudes out? You can kind of feel it if you put your hand on the back of your neck. That's the axis bone, and that's sometimes called the no bone, because that's what enables the head to go left to right. So these 7 vertebrae, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right to here, this is called the cervical spine. And the cervical spine, it curves into the body. It's a convex, concave, depending upon which way you're looking at it, curve. So, and what I want you to notice is what's supporting the cervical spine is only muscle, right? Only muscle here, which is why this area of the body, the cervical, is more delicate, because it's not protected by anything other than muscle. That's why, for example, you know, people will get whiplash, because there's not enough support structure here to prevent that. But if you look here, so now we come to, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is the thoracic spine. So the mid-back. And if you look at the mid-back, right, this part of the spine is attached to the ribs. These are the wing bones, or the scapulae. So it's attached to the ribs. The ribs in turn are attached to this bone here, which is called the sternum. So this is really, right, this is the rib cage, and this area of the body is very protected, right? What's underneath this? The heart and the lungs. So this is a very protected area of the body, and this area of the spine, usually you don't really get that same kind of injury here, because it has so much protection. This area of the body, the thoracic, so we have 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae. These vertebrae, they curve a little bit rounded. So you know when someone has, I don't know if I could do it yet, okay, right? So if somebody has kyphosis, which is that rounding of the thoracic spine, it means that this area of the spine is overly rounded, it's over exaggerated. So that's like that humpback, right, that we have. And we want to ignore that, or not ignore it. We want to stop it from happening. And that's one of the reasons why yoga could be so good, because it can really help with that posture. This area of the spine, so now we come down here, and this, by the way, so we have 12 ribs. The bottom ribs are called floating ribs. You see how the rib isn't attached. These 2 ribs, they're not attached to anything. So these are the floating ribs. But all of the other ribs attached to the sternum, or the breastbone. Then we have, and this is the area that tends to get everybody into trouble, we have what's called the lumbar spine. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 vertebrae in the lumbar spine. And the lumbar spine, it curves just like the neck. So, I mean, this skeleton doesn't have those curves, but this curves in a little bit like this. This is where, again, look at the cervical spine, right? Not a lot of support, muscular support only. The same thing is true for the lumbar spine. So this is why the cervical spine and the lumbar spine are so much more prone to injury, because what's only supporting that are, again, the muscles in the body. And the cervical spine, the lumbar spine, they curve the same way. And interestingly, very, very often, if you have something going on here in your lumbar, sometimes you need to look for the cause up here in your cervical spine. Then, so we have 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae. And then you're always hearing me talk about the sacrum, or the sacrum. So this is the sacrum here. Bring it in a little bit closer. And it's actually vertebrae that are fused together. So I want everyone to take their hand and find that bone. It's that flat bone below the waist at the base of the spinal column. And I refer to that bone a lot, right? So very often in class, I'll tell you to place your hand on the sacrum. So that's what I mean. You're placing your hand right here. And you can see that it is in between the hip bones. And then right at the very, very base of the spine, we have this little bone. This is the tailbone, or called the coccyx bone. So 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, 1 sacrum, and the coccyx, or the tailbone. Does anybody have any questions? I think if you have a question and you raise your hand, then Ashley can unmute you. Oh, Danielle, do you have a question? I'm not sure she's raising a hand because she has a, you have a question, honey? Ashley, can you unmute them? Oh, no, no question. Okay, good. All right, so this area here, this is called the collarbone, or the clavicle. It attaches to the arm bone. This is the humerus, and it attaches to the scapula, or the shoulder blades. This is called the shoulder girdle. And this joint, this shoulder joint, it's a ball and socket joint, right? So you see that we have this ability to do 360-degree rotation. So that's why it's called a ball and socket joint. But I want you to notice this is a very shallow joint, which is one of the reasons why it's so much more prone to injury than the hip joint, which is the other ball and socket joint. Because it's the head of the humerus, it sits into the shoulder girdle, but it's a shallow joint. So that's why so many people have injuries in their shoulders. I know some of you have injuries in your shoulders, right? You have rotator tear cuffs or some kind of abrasion in that area of the body. If you look at the hip joint though, so this is the crest of the hip bone. It's called the iliac crest. And you can kind of feel that on yourself. So if you take your hand and you run it along your hip bone, you'll feel this little protuberance right here. And the reason why this joint is so important for us in yoga is because we do so much forward bending, right? And I always tell you, I want you to bend forward from the hip rather than bend forward from the waist. So I'm going to take him off. and show you. So this is the iliac crest. This is the hip joint. And then this is the pubic bone here. And it attaches to, this is the femur, the thigh bone. And this is the hip joint, right? The ball of the hip joint. And this is also a ball and socket joint. You can have 360-degree rotation in both directions. But this joint, he came undone a little bit, this joint is a much deeper joint. So the head of the femur sits into this ball and socket. This is called the acetabulum. It sits there and it's a much deeper joint. But this is what I mostly want you to be aware of, that when I tell you to do a forward bend, you want to bend from the hip, unless I tell you otherwise. So you don't want to bend like this, right? When you're doing a forward bend, you don't want to bend from the lumbar spine, from the waist. When you do that, you put more pressure here, right? This presses in more tightly, and these overexpand. And over time, it can create pain in this area of the body, bending forward from the waist. So when I ask you to do a forward fold, whether it's sitting or standing, you want to fold from the hip joint. And you see that if you fold from the hip joint, now the spine is able to stay long rather than to collapse. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope. Okay, any questions? So I want to go over 2 more actions. Then I want you to take either arm.
I think Lois has a question. Just let me, I'm going to unmute her for 1 second. Okay, Lois, go ahead.
Okay, so forward bend, you want the spine fairly parallel to the floor, but then when you do ragdoll, you're getting a lot of bend in the spine, correct?
You mean when you do like a
You say
spinal
bend
roll?
forward?
You mean when you do a spinal roll?
No, you say bend forward, then you say let your arms hang like you were a ragdoll. Then that's more
So
bent,
not
right?
really, because I'll
Or is
show
it-
you, right? Let's see, can you see me okay?
Yeah,
So,
yes.
Oh. So now, I'm finding that iliac crest. So I'm finding right here. If everybody takes their finger, we'll do it in a moment. If everybody takes your finger and you slip it here, you're going to find a notch. And that's where you want to fold forward from that notch, because that's the seam of the hip joint. So I'm bringing my hands to the seam of the hip. I'm hinging down, right? So even though I'm here, and yes, now I am hanging. So, but this is a very relaxed spine. It's not really a rounded back in an active way. So I'm here, but do you see how I'm still bending forward from my hip joint as opposed to doing this, right? So if I do this, now I'm putting a lot of pressure in my lumbar spine because that's where I'm bending from. But if I do that, then my spine is simply extending into gravity. I'm not really working the muscles here to take me forward. I'm really working from the hip joint. Lois, does that answer your question?
Yes. Now, what about when you say roll up 1 vertebrae at a time?
Yes. So there are
Yeah,
exceptions.
that-
That's a good question. So there are exceptions to this hinging at the hip, though very few. But even then, so even when let me lift this up a little bit. Okay, there we go. So even when I'm rolling down, the feeling you want to have is that you're lifting out of the spinal column as you roll down, rather than just clumping down. You know, and I don't have it with me because I have it at the college. You know a slinky? Everybody knows a slinky? So think of the coils of the slinky like the vertebrae and the space in between like the discs. When you're doing the spinal roll, you want to use your mind to have this image that you're taking each one of these vertebrae and you're lifting it up and over rather than just crunching it up and over. Does that make sense? Lois, does that make sense to you? So let's say we're doing a seated forward fold, right? So now I want to do a seated forward fold. Again, you want to fold from the hip, not to fold from the waist. So this is why I often tell you that if your hips are really tight or your hamstrings are tight, you want to sit up higher. When you sit up higher, it enables you to get that lift from the base of the spine, and that enables you to fold forward from the hip joint rather than from the waist. So I'll illustrate that, right? So I have a lot of flexibility, right? So I literally lift the flesh of my buttocks. Again, I'm bringing my hands right into the seam. So that same place that the skeleton is folding from, right here, I bring my fingertips there and I'm folding forward from the hips. Now, obviously, once I'm here, my spine is going to round. But again, it's a passive rounding. So I'm not actively rounding my back. So that's fine. But what happens if your hamstring muscles are very tight or if your hip joints are very tight? So let's say I'm here like this. I have not a lot of movement in my hip joint. When I fold forward, I'm folding forward like this. I'm actively using these muscles to stretch myself forward, and that puts a strain on those vertebrae. If I lift myself up, and if my hamstrings are tight and I put something under my knees, now when I hinge forward, can you see how that enables me to move from the hip rather than from the waist? And that's really what you want to do. Is that clear to everybody? Does anybody have any more questions? We're good? Is this useful for you guys? Just like a thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, so let's see if we can find some of this on our own. I want everyone to come and stand up. And then I'm going to use the skeleton first. So find your hip crest, your iliac crest. Run your fingers around until you find this notch between the hip and the thigh. So you're taking your hands, you are bringing your hands into the seam of the hip. Press back, 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 back. Feel that length in your spinal column. and fold down. Let the head relax. And now coming up the same way, lift your chin. Lead with your chin and come up to center. So let me see you do that again. Hang on. I want to go to, what's it, can I do that? Gallery view. Okay, everybody, hand to the seam of your hip. Yes, Hannah, that's correct. Fold forward. Nice, Stella, beautiful. Linda, I only see your ceiling. Yes, Danielle, you've got it. Nice, Irma. Nice, Sarah. Good, Gigi. And now lead with your chin and come up to center. Hey, that looked good. I think everybody got that. Great. Now, another thing. When you come, so these are the shoulder blades, right? Remember I talked about how the thoracic spine, we tend to, like if you have that kyphosis, that rounding in the back, which we don't want, I often give you the instruction to think of bringing the shoulder blades together. So let me just switch my view here. Okay, so when I ask you to gather the shoulder blades together, what I mean is I want you to think about taking the shoulder blades and drawing them in towards the spinal column. It's an action that takes place by your muscles. So let's do this. Take your arms out and now pull the shoulders down and back, and you should feel, do you feel the shoulder blades coming in and down? Can everybody feel that? The shoulder blades in and down. You got that? Thumbs up or down. Yes? Okay, so we'll put your arms down. When I ask you to bring the shoulder blades together, that's what I mean. And with few exceptions, like let's say we're coming out of, let me go back to speaker view. Let's say we're coming out of a sun salutation, right? What I ask you to do is to lead with your chin. So what happens when you lead with your chin? When you lead with your chin, do you see how it moves the neck? It moves the cervical spine more strongly into its natural arch. And that helps me to come up with a long spine or a flat back. Whereas if you keep the chin down into the chest, so you see how by me pulling the chin down, it causes this area, this thoracic spine to round. So if I come up with the spine round, with the chin into the chest, it tends to keep my back rounded as I come up. Whereas if I lift the chin, do you see how it moves my spine into that long length to come up? So when we do postures like spinal sun salutation, on the way down and on the way up, we want to lead with our chin. So let's find that, okay? Take your hands, place them. You know what, I'm gonna first go to speaker view and then I'm gonna go gallery view to see you. So I want you to find your iliac crest, find your hip bone, find the notch. If you're not sure where that notch is, if you bend your knee a little bit, it's right in that seam. Keep your chin lifted. Push back into the seam of the hip and fold down. Now do let your head drop, let it hang. Now, gather your shoulder blades together. Lift your chin. Draw a line up the wall with your chin as you come up to center. And then release. So now I want to watch you. Okay, bring your hands to the seam of your hips. Gather your shoulder blades together. Press into, so Stella, bring your hands into the front of the hip joint, right into the front. Hinge down. Nice, Danielle. That's it, Stella. Sarah, beautiful. Good, Gigi. Fold all the way down. When you're down there, let your head hang, but keep your fingers where they are. Let your head hang. Stella, relax your head completely. Dvora, let your head hang. Henna, can you fold completely down now? All the way down. Now, lift your chin. Lead with your chin. Gather those shoulder blades together. Come up with a long, oh, very good, everybody. Come up with a long spine. Linda, I still only see your ceiling. That was good. Did you get that?
Needs tape. It needs my art plate is challenging. I can't get
Okay.
it.
Did everybody get that? Are you getting that? Questions? Okay. Let's try it now in a let's try it now. Danielle, are those your grandchildren? They're so cute. Let's try it now in a seated position. So come and sit down. And I want you to put padding underneath your hips if you need to. Take your legs straight out in front of you. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to join you first. And then I'm going to watch. Okay, so hands are again at the seam of the hips. Bend your knees a little bit to find it. Press into the seam of your hips and fold forward. Now, if you need to, bend your knees more to find that hinge. So remember, right? It looks like this. You want to hinge at the hip. So do you see how when I do that, the hip socket rolls over the head of the femur. Now lead with your chin and come back up to center. So lower, pine tree, lead with your chin. Okay, so let me watch you now. Okay, hands to the seam of your hips. Stella, you want to try it sitting down? Fold forward, bend your knees if you need to. Of course, once you get all the way down, your body will round. Fold all the way down and then stretch your hands forward. Reach towards the toes, but don't worry if you don't get it. Now, bring your hands to the seam of your hips. Lift your chin, just like we did when we did standing. So pine tree, lift your chin. Gather the shoulder blades together and lead with your chin to come up. That's good. And then release. Questions? Any questions? Okay.
That was very good, Diana.
So good, thank you. So what I want, right, is that, and Ashley, this is recorded, right? So they can access this?
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
I'll have,
So you guys
Mhm.
can watch this over and over again to reinforce it. What I'm hoping is that now when we go into our practice in future classes, that you're able to retain this imaging in your mind so that when you do the postures, you have more of that alignment awareness. I do want to go a little bit over the shoulder joint because I know that the shoulders are such an issue for so many people. He gets loose as I move him. Okay. So I want everyone to extend one arm out. Doesn't matter which one. The thumb is facing up. Now take that thumb and rotate the thumb back. So I want you to look at what happens to the joint when you do that. I'm taking the thumb like you're hitchhiking, I always say. I roll the thumb back. Notice what happens to the shoulder joint. The shoulder joint, so this is called an external rotation. It looks like this, an external rotation. When you externally rotate the shoulder, this gives you freedom to take the arm up. So let's do it again, right? Externally rotate the shoulder and then lift the arm straight up to the best of your ability. Bring it out and down. I'm going to do it with you. Do the other side. Take one arm out. Bring your hand here so you feel it. Externally rotate the shoulder. Lift the arm. Bring the arm out and down. So when you externally rotate the shoulder, it gives you much more freedom of movement. Again, if you look, right, I externally rotate the shoulder. That enables the shoulder to lift up and down. Now, if I internally rotate the shoulder, so I'm internally rotating, look what happens. This bone gets caught on this arm and I can't lift the arm as high. So especially for those of you who have shoulder issues, this is really important. So I want you to, let's do this. Take your hand, place it on your shoulder. So an internal rotation would be turning your thumb down. So turn your thumb down and now try to lift the arm. Do you feel how it kind of gets caught? You don't have full range of motion in your shoulder. So that simple action, let's do it together. Let me go to gallery view. Take both arms out like you're hitchhiking, but I want you to pay attention to this. So let's change my mind. One hand on your shoulder. I want you to really feel that action. Hand here, like you're hitchhiking. Feel the external rotation of the shoulder and then lift the arm. That's it. Nice, Anita. Good. Take the arm out, turn it down. Let's do the other side. Hand here. Externally rotate the shoulder. Take the arm up. Take it down. Now, let's do that together. Both arms out. Externally rotate the shoulder. And by the way, when you do that, it brings the shoulder blades down. Now, take the arms. That's it. Good, Anita. Lift those arms up over your head. Take the arms out. Turn your thumbs down and lower the arms. So that's important. That was good, everybody, by the way. Because we do so many postures where, for example, I have you bring the arm up over the head. And when you take a moment to take that action in the shoulder joint, it enables you to get that full range of motion. So let's try that. Come and sit down. Take the right hand down. Take the left arm out to the side. Now, I want you to pay attention to the action here in the shoulder. Externally rotate the shoulder. Bring that arm up to the ear. Take a breath in. And as you exhale, tiptoe those fingertips over. And now breathe. Think of breathing here into the left side of your body. Hold and breathe. Come to center. Internally rotate the shoulder so your thumb goes down and release the arm. Now let's do the other side. Take the left hand down, right arm out. Hitchhike. So you're getting that external rotation. Lift the arm to the ear. Take a breath in. And as you exhale, tiptoe those fingers over to the left. So you should feel that stretch through the right side of your body. Come back to center. You're taking that shoulder internally rotate the shoulder and release the arms down. So if you have issues with your shoulders, the constant repetition of just that action of externally rotating will help you with that shoulder over time. So you really do want to be aware of that. Now, I want to go down. So that's an external rotation of the shoulder joint. And remember, right, this is a ball and socket joint. It has 360-degree rotation. What's the other ball and socket joint? The hip joint. So just as there's an external rotation of the shoulder, so we also have an external rotation of the hip. And where does that come from? He's getting a little loose here, so hang on. So for example, when I ask you to do triangle pose, and I ask you to turn your foot, I really don't mean to turn your foot. I really mean for you to take your hip joint and externally rotate that joint. So I want us to find that. So let's come up to standing. Come up to standing, go a little wide in your legs. Now, find that same seam of your hip that we did in our forward bend. So take your hands to your hips and just hinge forward a little bit. Keep your chin lifted so you find that. Okay, everybody find that? Come up to center. Now keep your hands where they are. And let's do the left side. So bend your left knee a little bit. And in the same way we did the shoulder, externally rotate the hip. So you should feel the hip going like this. And then bring it back. Let's do the right side. You have to bend your knee a little bit to get that. Feel the external rotation and bring it back. Let's do the left side again. Externally rotate and bring it back. Other side. Externally rotate and bring it back. So now I want to show you, right? Because we do triangle pose all the time. So watch. Okay, I'm going wide in my legs. I have my hands to the seam of the hips. I'm going to find that same action as we did before. Now I take that hip joint and I externally rotate the joint. This enables me to find that hinge at the hip. If I didn't externally rotate it, I wind up getting caught right here, and you can see, I can't go any further. Let me show you with the skeleton, because he does a great triangle pose. Okay, so he's going wide. Let me bring this down a little bit. There we go. Okay. I'm externally rotating the hip. And when you do triangle, this is what you want. You want the hinge like this. So can you see that that hinge, it's from that same hip joint. Let me bring this closer so you can see. Do you see how, whoops, where is he? Do you see how when you're hinging at the hip, it's that same action. I'm hinging at the hip joint, and you see how that brings my spine parallel to the ground. As opposed to, if I don't do that, I wind up going like this. And that's not what you want in a triangle pose. That's putting a lot of pressure on the underside of the vertebrae and overextending the top of the vertebrae. Whereas if I move from here, then that enables me to find that length in my spinal column. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Are you able to visualize that? Should we try it? Let's try a triangle pose. So let's go wide in the legs. I'm gonna watch you guys. We need like 2 hours for this. Okay, go wide in your legs. I want everyone to find that hinge at the hip. So that same forward fold action, just so that you can feel it. And then come up to center. Now, externally rotate the right hip. Keep your hand here, and from that hip joint, so you're placing your hand right where the hip meets the thigh, hinge over to your right. Take the right hand down to your leg. Now, so Henna, make sure you're not leaning forward, Henna. Just go sideways. Don't reach for the floor. We're not reaching for the floor. Now, I want you to take the right hand to the right shoulder. Left hand to the left shoulder. When you extend the left arm straight up to the ceiling, externally rotate that shoulder, nice Ruth, and bring the arm over your head. Stella, you want to go the other way. Stella, you want to go to the right. Sarah, go wider in your legs. Ruth, that's really good. Come up to center. Okay, I'm going to do this with you. Because some of you got this and some of you did not yet, but that's okay because, let me just lift this up. Here we go. Okay, so let's go wide. We're going to do it in this way. So I want to try to bring all of this together a little bit. Hands to the seam of your hip. Everybody should know where that is by now. Find that forward fold just so you know you're hinging at the hip joint. Now come up to center. Turn your left hip, externally rotate the hip. From that hip, hinge over to your left. And then just bring your hand down. Don't reach for the floor. Now, take your right arm, externally rotate the right shoulder. Lift the arm up to the ceiling, and then bring that arm over your head. And now you are in Trikonasana, or triangle pose. Raise the top arm. Inhale, come up to center. Exhale, turn both feet forward. And let's take extended wide angle pose. Hands at the hips. So right, you should know exactly where that is now. Hinge forward. Bring your fingertips to the floor. Keep your chin lifted. So if you look, right, you see how my spine is long? You want to be here with that long spine. And now fold completely down. I'm going to watch everybody. We're running out of time. Let's see. Good. Nice. Good. Henna, can you go a little wider in your legs, maybe? Sarah, that's good. Go a little wider in your legs. Gigi, relax your head. Now, listen carefully. I want you to bring your feet a little bit closer together. Take your hands to the seam of your hips. Gather your shoulder blades together. Yes, nice, Irma. Lift your chin. Remember, you want to lead from your cervical spine. Gigi, lift your head more. Nice, Ruth. Come back up to center. And release. Okay. Bring your legs together. And come just sit down for a moment. So, Ashley, can you unmute everybody? Oh, I don't know if you can unmute everybody. Can you? I think they have to unmute themselves.
I can do a few. Not everybody responds to the unmute request.
Okay. So how was that?
Great, great.
Very interesting. Interesting.
Do you feel like that will be helpful to you?
Only us.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting.
Very good, Diana.
Okay, any questions?